Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my pleasure to welcome today's program, Andy Dyer, who's President, Transportation Management at AFS Logistics. And today we're going to talk about how to prevent your TMS from becoming a shock absorber. So we've got horrible roads here where I live. Lots of bumps and potholes, everywhere. So not surprising, I've had to replace the shock absorbers on my car, more than one time. But what does a shock absorber do? Well, they dampen and absorb all those bumps in the road so that your car can travel as smoothly as possible. If you're a transportation manager, you probably feel like you've been a shock absorber of your company's supply chain logistics operations, especially over the past few years. What does that mean exactly? And what actions can companies take to prevent their TMS from becoming a shock absorber? Well, those are some of the questions we're going to explore in today's episode. And it's great to have Andy on the program to share his insights and perspective on the topic. So Andy, welcome to the program.
Great. Adrian, thank you for having me. I look forward to our discussion.
Great. So, Andy, before we kind of get into this whole discussion of shock absorbers and how it relates to supply chain logistics and transportation, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with AFS Logistics, but some people may not be. So maybe why don't you briefly tell us a little bit about the company, a little bit about your role there?
Sure. So company was founded in 1982, privately held, non-asset-based third-party logistics provider. And we support a number of services to include freight audit payment and settlement, managed transportation, truckload brokerage, deep capability in parcel and LTL for both cost and service management.
Great.
In my role specifically, I support our North American freight forwarding, our managed transportation, and our international freight forwarding capabilities.
Great. Well, looking at across that broad spectrum of services, I'm sure you've been quite busy over the past few years with everything that's going on, particularly in the transportation market, from the crazy constraints and rate hikes during the COVID era to now, some of the dips and valleys that we've been experiencing in these more recent months.
It has definitely been an era of volatility. If you remember the old supply chain game about the penny game that really is about understanding the bullwhip effect, we have been living the bullwhip effect on a global scale in real time over the past 3 years.
Yes, absolutely. I think both you and I probably had a full head of hair, 3 years ago, and look what's happened. Look what's happened since. But anyway, joking aside, let's get into the topic now. So TMS as a shock absorber, like I said in my opening remarks. What does that mean, and why does it happen?
Oh, sure. So transportation management, generally speaking, is at the back end of everybody's output process, right? So a thing is ordered, a thing is made, configured, whatnot, and hopefully it has to be moved to where it's going to be used or consumed in some way, shape, or form. And so the transportation, given that it's the last piece of the output process, receives the accumulation of all the inefficiencies and ineffectiveness upstream, whether that be delayed production, lack of production, late materials coming inbound, maybe improper order processing, vagaries in order sourcing, all of those things that might happen singularly or in combination on an order, all of a sudden come down to transportation. And then the transportation teams have to figure out, well, how do I either move this thing faster, which is one way to move from trucks to planes, to use an extreme example, or how do I source this differently and make that decision in rapid fire real time to minimize compromising the deliverable to the receiver or customer on the other end.
Yeah, I think I remember years ago I was talking to the executive in transportation at a very large, CPG company. And I still remember his quote. He said, transportation is always the last to know. And he gave a specific example of their marketing promotions team. So they would have multiple promotions groups that would do, promotions for shampoo and promotions for hand soap and so forth. And he said, none of those groups would talk to each other. So a lot of times, the shampoo people and the hand soap people will run promotions during the same exact time. And of course, when you run promotions, you expect an uplift in demand and sales and so forth. But no one will bother to tell transportation about these plans. So what would happen is all of a sudden, there would be a request or a need to start shipping, 10 extra truckloads per week over this time period. that transportation didn't plan for. So now they had to scramble, to your point, to how are we going to meet this demand? So either they had to, find some capacity at the last minute, which is very expensive, and particularly if it's a tight capacity environment, it might not be that easy to do. So it just created a lot of added cost, a lot of running around for the transportation provider, for the transportation department, and then risk as well, because now they're at risk of not meeting their customers' objectives in terms of running these promotions successfully. So it sounds like part of this shock absorber thing is it's like a lack of communication, collaboration with other functional groups within the
It
company.
is. It's about awareness and knowledge, and to kind of piggyback on your definition by example. I mean, years ago, I was running a large contract for U.S. Department of Defense, and we got this order in that we had to move this thing from quite literally cross continent, from the Pacific coast to the U.S. Atlantic coast, and we had to move this thing, and it was really long, and so it was going to require charter. It was going to cost every bit of five figures to move this thing, and we had a very smart load planner at the time who just started asking questions. This thing is 12 feet long. It's 8-inch square on end. What is it? Well, it's a pipe. Well, what kind of pipe? Well, a metal pipe. Well, is it specialty materials? Because some of those things, or kind of some specialty bore on the inside, or very engineered fittings around it. No, it's a gauge X aluminum pipe. So we're getting ready to spend five figures to move this thing when we could send a sailor to Ace Hardware with a P card and pick one up for not a whole lot. And that, again, is this function of people weren't talking. All they knew is they had a need and they didn't have the thing where they needed it. But what was it? What are the rules around it? And how do you understand how to source different categories of material with different levels of urgency and different alternatives if you don't have what you need? So it really does come down to, people talking at the end of the day.
Well, I think that leads me, to my next question, which is, what actions can, companies take to prevent this from happening? That is, to prevent the transportation and logistics operations, and organizations from taking the brunt of, again, these poorly laid plans or lack of communication, lack of data, and so forth.
Sure. Well, I think for me, I like to think of it in terms of people thinking outside of their functions. Okay. And that's also think it's important, just a word of change management advice to the transportation folks, don't go in, with the victim mentality. We're all here together to make this all work. Right. So just thinking outside your function and really, I would frame the conversation inside an organization as how do you focus on the handoffs into one functional process and the handoffs out of that one functional process. So if you focus on that, again, thinking about inbound receiving. If I'm running a warehouse and I'm receiving things, I need to know what's coming at me as opposed to every day being Christmas when I open up the dock doors and see how many trailers I have and how full the trailers are and what kind of stuff. So, again, if I'm running inbound transportation and I'm supporting a distribution center, it's important for me to think outside of, did I get the truck there on time? Okay, yes, that's important. It absolutely is important. But it's also important that I let the receiving team know, here's the wave of trucks you're seeing. Here's the stuff that's going to be on them so they can start planning labor and start planning their shifts and things of that nature. And again, what's the ripple effect? Well, if I receive things on time and in order, I can stock them on time and in order, which means I can drop and allocate orders against that inventory and get them out the door to my customer in the same orderly fashion. Okay. So really, I think it's all about thinking, which is think outside your function and focus on the handoffs, both in and out.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, for so long, I mean, having been an industry analyst now for over 24 years, I mean, especially, we always talk about the functional silos, right? So you've got logistics and you've got manufacturing and you've got sales and marketing and, and the list goes on. But even within transportation, you've always had these silos, right? You had inbound and you had outbound and those two didn't communicate or collaborate, very effectively as well. And I think, one of the terms I hear a lot about today relative to what you were just talking about is, particularly in terms of breaking down these silos, is kind of better orchestration, supply chain orchestration. But I'm kind of curious. I mean, when you first engage with prospective clients, I mean, is this concept of, you're talking about, this taking more holistic perspective, this supply chain orchestration approach, is that something they're thinking about when they approach you and something that they want to enable?
Some do, but more often the conversation starts about immediate pain. I have a problem with. Okay, my costs are too high. My OTIF is too low. I have too much inventory of this. I have too little inventory of that. So that's usually where the conversation starts, which is, and again, it's all about the symptoms, right? The symptom is inventory. The symptom is poor delivery rate. The symptom is customer chargebacks for non-compliant deliveries and things of that nature. And then you can then elevate that conversation through largely a series of 5 why type conversation. Well, why is that? Well, why is that? Why is the other? Do all that fishbone diagramming. And ultimately that leads people to really see, gee whiz, that happens because I didn't know about that. Or that happens because the other party wasn't properly informed about something else, whether it be fullness of information, accuracy of information, or timeliness of information. So that when you get that conversation, people don't always use the words, the acronym SCO, but that's really what it's all talking about.
Right. I love that you brought up the 5 whys. I mean, back in the day, before I started as an industry analyst, I worked in manufacturing new product development at Motorola. That's where I started my career. And we used to use the 5 whys, a lot as part of the whole Lean Six Sigma and all that. It was kind of part of the what we were all trained on. But that really helps you get to the root cause of a lot of these symptoms that you talked about. And I think unless you take that more holistic approach, more system-wide approach, you end up kind of in this whack-a-mole scenario, because if you hyper focus on, let's say, the transportation symptom, you might be creating problems from an inventory perspective or from a manufacturing perspective, or vice versa. If you hyper focus on the inventory side of things, you might then create problems on the transportation side. So really, I think where I've seen the most success are companies that really take this kind of balanced scorecard approach, where you really have metrics in place that are really cutting across the end-to-end supply chain, and then have the processes and the technology and the perspective internally for everyone to be asking these questions and looking at it not only within their own particular function, but really across the different
Absolutely.
functions.
You have to always look downstream and question, what are the unintended consequences of the decision or set of decisions we're getting ready to make, and game through them. Now, again, you don't want to get caught up in analysis paralysis, certainly, but a healthy pause to ensure that we're not doing something reckless or ill-informed that may look great in my desk, but not great over there. That's an important thing. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. So can you share with us, some customer examples of, again, this supply chain orchestration in action, and how is technology, helping you to enable it?
Well, sure. So, vendor inbound is kind of one of the classic places to start. It's not uncommon that a lot of, kind of the vendor management activity is really led by the procurement teams. Okay. And so getting the procurement teams plugged into what does the manufacturing distribution operations want, depending on if you're a manufacturer or distributor of things, right? Makes that difference. And then start understanding, well, what's important. Well, you know what? If I'm running a manufacturing plant, I really don't care when a vendor ships anything. What I care is when it delivers. Do I have it when I need it? So this concept of changing focus, instead of kind of input-based measures, did it ship? Outcome-based measures, did I get it? Okay, on time, in full, whatnot. And so using technology platforms like Kinaxis, which is one that we've decided to use and deploy and run vendor management programs, whereby we can understand the rules, publish the planned schedules, understand what has and hasn't been done, and then make all of that activity broadly available to all the stakeholders in the process. And oh, by the way, if you have complete, consistent stream of information, then you can start making transportation decisions around that are both effective and efficient.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example. And I think, one of the points you said there, I think one of the key areas that technology is, I think, playing a bigger and bigger role, a more important role is, I think historically technology was viewed, a lot of enterprise software was viewed as something that was within the four walls of the company. And certainly, there are certain functions or certain things that are meant only for inside the four walls of the company. But when we are talking about, supply chain logistics, those processes by and large are inherently multi enterprise related. You've got multiple vendors, you've got multiple logistics service providers involved, suppliers, and the list goes on. So a key capability from a technology standpoint is making sure that the right information, the right data is available to all the stakeholders that are involved in that process. And then the ability for each of those stakeholders to operate off of that common set of data to execute their part of the process, as efficiently and nowadays with AI and all that, as automated as possible. So, I mean, are you seeing that now with the kind of the evolution of AI, machine learning, that playing a bigger role in this as well?
Well, it is. I mean, it's iterating, much more quickly. And, what I've found is, when you start thinking about transportation as part of a greater trading partner relationship across whatever ecosystem you're in, all right, and you start thinking, well, gee whiz, now maybe it's not just about rating and mode selection and what color truck am I going to have bump the dock, but there are other types of decisions that can be more rapidly made with some of these new technologies, i.e., if within your, not again, don't think of it as a TMS anymore, think of it as an SEO platform, okay? If you start exposing inventory into that platform, again, it's not a WMS system, it's not here to replace that. But if you can inform what inventory is where, you can start using these platforms to make dynamic sourcing decisions. If just you have to happen to have a stock out in one location, because no matter how efficient we are, we're not 100% effective and efficient, right? You can make those plan B decisions very quickly. And yeah, you're a little bit of a shock absorber, but it's a bit of a speed bump now as opposed to a massive pothole and having to go to the dealership and get a new tire, which, by the way, I had to do just a couple months ago myself. So,
Yeah, so it's either a shock absorber. You have to get new shock absorbers like I do, or a new tire because it's a blowout. Well, Andy, I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and I'm sure we can probably speak for hours on all aspects of this. But maybe as a way to summarize, I mean, what advice would you give to companies as they're thinking of ways to position themselves for success moving forward, particularly from a supply chain logistics perspective?
sure. I mean, I would certainly investigate and embrace technology, but do not think that technology in and of itself is the full solution. Okay. I would use technology as a means to operationalize and deploy change in process, change in thinking. Okay. So if all you do is take your existing processes with all their goodness and maybe all their inefficiencies and just drop them in a new piece of technology, all you'll probably find is that same thing gets replicated faster. Okay, which might have some benefit to it, the speed, but that's not the full benefit. The bigger benefit is, the broader visibility, the more informed decision making, and the better coordinated activity across all the stakeholders in the process. So embrace your technology, but don't think of the technology as the start and stop and end of the entire process. And the other thing too, back to your comment about dashboards and metrics that matter, really focus on outcome-based measures. Okay. That's really where it is. Did I achieve the goal as opposed to did I collect enough inputs?
Yeah, great advice there, Andy. And again, I appreciate you sharing your insights and advice on this topic. And I'm sure that many of our viewers, at a minimum, have got some food for thought and at least a starting point in terms of, how to start thinking about how not to make their transportation or get out of the practice of making their transportation department and the TMS the shock absorber of their operations. So again, thank you for making the time.
Oh, glad to, Adrian, and thanks for the engaging conversation. I had a lot of fun.
Great. I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Kinaxis website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Andy, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for watching, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.